welcome to the Creating Magic Art panel at Gen Con. We're so happy to be back as a Presence for Magic this year, and we're so happy that you're here to join us. Let's run down the artists we have with us today. We're super excited. Starting at my right, introduce yourself, please.
I'm Tyler Walpole, probably the newest member of the Magic Art team up here.
Hi, I'm Aaron Miller.
Hi, I'm Chris Seaman.
And I'm Jess Lanzillo. I'm the creative director for Magic. Yay, exciting. So I manage all the writers and world builders and art directors. So I just kind of want to walk you through, first of all, before we start showing off all these guys' amazing work, just what that process looks like on the Magic side. So we have all of these people internal to Wizards that are going to create all the content for your cards, right? You've got your game designers who are managing the mechanical design. You've got your narrative designers who are doing a bunch of the world building. Bam. Graphic designers, they're doing all the frames and iconography. I don't know if you've seen some of the previews for archery and what we're doing with the frames there, but stuff like that. The art directors, the most important part of this process and this relationship with these guys is the art directors who are taking all of the awesome development work, helping to do the world building, and then guiding all the artists to success. And we'll talk about the different ways that that can look for any particular piece. And then we have digital artists at the end of the process who are doing essentially like a whole other round of painting in order to create those really dynamic foils that everyone loves to collect. So how it works internally at Wizards is we go through kind of this very basic order of operations to get to what we call a world guide, which is how we create all of the art. First off, it starts with pitching worlds. We all are just constantly pitching what we want. Hey, I want, I don't know, I can't even spoil anything. Give me an example. Anyone in the audience, what kind of world do you think that Wizards should do? You, please. What is that?
That'd be cool.
Wild West World.
I agree.
Go figure. I've never heard that one before. Just kidding. So say we want to do Wild West World. I'd be like, tell me more. Tell me how that's going to be magic. Tell me how it's going to be fantasy. What kind of characters would you want to see there? Then what we do is we kind of slate it in this process called arc planning, which is how are we going to create the standard environment when we're thinking about it in a world building capacity. So when you're like, why did you do this world at this particular time? Usually the answer is, well, we looked at we're doing, heavy gold emphasis here, heavy factionalized emphasis here, so we want to do tribal here. And we're making sure that we're putting the worlds in the progression that's going to make the most awesome play environment for all of you. Do you guys ever have questions about that? Like, why are we jumping to this world at any particular time? Is it always a shock, or are you kind of you kind of get the vibe of where we're going?
Yeah, I don't think it's ever really a big shock. Mostly I just want to make sure that I'm staying working.
Awesome.
I actually want to stay in the worlds longer.
Sure.
Does that ever come up where they,
I'd say that it does come up on occasion. I think doing 3 sets in Ravnica gave a different kind of response at times.
Okay.
Because of the amount of rendering of the buildings, where they're like, I'd like a little bit of a break before we do that again.
Yeah, from the artist side, Ravnica, or especially, where was Sahili from again?
Yeah, all the filigree,
for Kaladesh.
Oh yes, Kaladesh. Yeah. So I know that that I loved it, but other artists could use a break. But
totally.
Yeah, I would do that. I would do all the worlds all the time, forever. Plus whatever's coming out.
Awesome.
How do you decide to revisit a world?
So a lot of times that'll be part of that arc planning process I was mentioning. We'll sit there and go, how long has it been since we've been to blah? Does that fit in our environment? We really have a space that really is begging for factions. Do we want that to be a new faction world, or do we want to go back to Ravnica? What's the thirst of the audience for, I'll just keep saying Ravnica because it's the one we've done most recently. What's the thirst of the audience for Ravnica, right? Raise of hands from everyone in the audience. Who thinks we should go back to Ravnica once a year? Okay, we've got 2. Who thinks maybe every 3 years is okay? Who's probably 5 years or more. So, as you can see from the hands in the audience, it was relatively overwhelmingly, probably like 5 years or more in between those kinds of settings. So we're always kind of just asking our audience, hey, when do you want to play in the set again? When is it going to fit in nicely? We don't necessarily want to do it right next to another faction world. And then we'll put it in the schedule and we start, figuring out what the new kind of twist is on a return to. So for instance, the last Ravnica, can you talk a little bit about like how you interacted with that from a flavor standpoint of us doing kind of like that fall setting?
Well, for me, that was just really exciting to work on because so the first set I worked on was Dominaria, and when I first played Magic was way back in the 90s because I'm older than I look. So like that was sort of felt like a homecoming to me to be working on that plane. And then the second time I was serious about playing Magic was for the original Ravnica set. So when we went right from Dominaria into that was heavy on the nostalgia front for me. But one of my favorite parts about just getting any Magic assignments is getting the world guide that shows. They just put so much work into the world building, and there's just so much detail that's fleshed out in it, but in a way where it's just to give indications of what we need to do as the artist. So they even specifically say sometimes don't copy these, just use this stuff as inspiration. So I really appreciate that you guys give us room to do our own thing within those parameters. But I just geek out over it when it's a new world. I spend a whole day just pouring
It's
through
one of
it.
our favorite parts of every new world. I wish we could share that stuff, but we can't. But it's a fantastic part of the process is the world building that happens visually before the cards. It happens in the concept push. I guess we hadn't gotten there yet.
We're almost there, but you're setting me up really nicely. Thank you.
That part is so fantastic when we get the results of it. It really helps us see the possibilities, the things that we could add to the narrative of the visuals that might not be specific to the card that they're asking for, that we know that, I can pull stuff from this part of the world and that part of the world. I know what it looks like, so I can pull in pieces. Or I've been inspired enough that I can add a new thing that they are asking for, but everything is supplied for me conceptually from the whole world kit. So, love it. I'd give an example, but I can't.
I've put some examples in the presentation, so
Well,
we'll actually
right.
see some
Old
world
stuff,
guide,
not new stuff.
little preview pages. Woo.
Oh, you brought some?
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe. I mean, you'll see why. So yeah, basically, we'll do the arc planning. We go into world building. We're like, hey, here's our new world. We're doing, Wild West world. What is that going to look like for us? So that's like a big interplay with the card design team. What's that environment going to look like? What's that shaping up to be? Oh, it's leaning tribal. Oh, it's leaning factionalized. Maybe the creative team kind of wants factions, but it's not going to be factionalized mechanically, so we'll do something called like flavor factions, where we still want to have that vibe of factionalization, but it's not necessarily going to be mechanically relevant. That kind of stuff.
Do you get writers involved early on?
Oh, the writers are driving a whole bunch of this, right? So they're, we've already kind of pre-written in that arc planning phase. Like, generally, this is probably what the set is. But then we start developing, like, all of the lore behind it during that world building phase. Hey, we need this landscape to look like this. There needs to be a river going here. Well, what happened historically in that region to give that name of that river? Then we get, like, the last names of, what the characters should be in that region. It's just, like, backing out your world building from developing that lore. So that gives you a lot of the toolkit that you would need to go into the concept push and say, hey, we know that the kobolds, if anyone watched the last panel, the kobolds in this region don't normally have clerics, but they need them at this point because this event is happening, right? So then we'll give that direction to the internal and external concept artists that come in for the push, and they'll say, oh, okay, well, if it's a really like violently reactive, environmentally reactive region, but there's clerics, I don't know if they'd necessarily have just simple robes. How would they protect themselves from the environment, right? So going through that process, developing out a lot of those looks, and we keep it relatively light, as you'll see, so that we can then put together this sometimes a normal size, like 100 to 150 pages, sometimes massive, if we're doing a return to 300, 400 pages world guide, that then is the toolkit that we'll send out to the artists. And just to give you kind of like an example, here's a page of just Azoria's costuming from our last world guide. We had a whole bunch of reference from our card art, but we wanted to take like a fresh look at it. So we whipped up some concepts, and then we provide like little bits of text here, so to kind of read this out loud. Armor mostly consists of a white porcelain-like metal and draped blue fabric. So even if the concept art is a little bit rough, you can read through it and say, oh, I get what your intention is here. Let me kind of riff on that, right? Armor is heavy and intimidating, just like the Azorius, with all of their rules and bureaucracy.
And to her point, what that would then tell us is say these knights are going to be like they ask for a round table or a table. It'll say table or just something in the room. The fact that there's a lot of circles, all of those things will give us ideas and how to represent stuff around them. That okay, this faction there's lots of circles. Maybe some other faction is triangles, some is squares. The things that you guys use to instantly recognize those factions, that will kind of put those in other areas.
Awesome. Well, the next part of the process, besides just the world guide that these guys get, is something that we call an art description, right? And that's an art brief, however you want to talk about it. And we'll pull up a whole bunch of them for examples during this panel, so I'm not going to get super in the weeds right now. But basically the summary of it is a translation by our narrative design group and art directors of the mechanics and the world guide synthesized into how can we visually represent this as not only just an awesome game piece to help you understand what the card is doing, but to make you more immersed in the world, right? And feel like you're part of this, you understand like this particular flavor that we're going for with this card. Let's start. Chris, you're up.
Hello.
Hi, Chris.
Hi.
We're going to start with Stitcher Supplier. So I put on the slide the art description of what we got, as well as an example of the reference that you would have received. So do you want to talk about like what you did when you received this art description? I'll have slides in the or sketches in final next.
Yeah. So let me reread this because it's been a little while.
Well, I bolded the important parts to make it easy for everyone.
Perfect. Yeah. So this was one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this particular description was it seemed like a very calming description in a way. It wasn't full of action. It wasn't over the top, and so the action of disposing of a head in the wrong bin, I felt needed to be very direct and simple, and so I chose a very direct, simple action with that. And she's not chucking the head, she's not shooting for 3 with it, so it's very simple and very direct. So
awesome.
So here are the sketches that I turned in for the thumbnail there. Once again, I went very graphic with the contrast, making sure that one of the things that I think all of us artists are aware when we work on magic cards is they're printing at the size of a postage stamp, so they have to have really high contrast in the final image. So when I start my thumbnails, I try to work that. And the thumbnail, I think I probably did maybe like 2 by 3, so I worked it very small and it worked out. I kind of laid out the scene. I knew I wanted some lighting in the background. I knew I wanted to have the stretcher in the back there, and then the bins with the body parts and putting the wrong body part in the wrong bin. So yeah, and then the finished sketch, I gathered reference to work from and put that together, and I like to work my sketches pretty detailed for the most part. I like to add a lot of value, and that actually then aids me in the painting when I get to the final painting stage. So,
and something you can see here is, I have the card name at the top, Stitcher Supplier, but you can see on the sketch, on Chris's sketch here, it had a different name while in development. So that's,
right.
Our development names. We have them on all the cards. They're not final, but they're just as a guide for the artist to kind of understand what we're going for. We're going to change them a lot of times based on the art that we get back in, and just various other world building needs and conflicts with other cards that we might have already made. So you'll see that kind of throughout this presentation today. Here we go for some final.
Yeah, so here's the finished image for that piece. A fun little tidbit I used for the reference of her. I wanted her to be very beautiful but kind of gruesome, so I looked at Audrey Hepburn as inspiration for her face. Kind of a fun little bit there. But yeah, this was a fun piece to work on. I kind of like to. Personally, I like to tap into the kind of the darker, gruesome, more gothic stuff is always very fun to play, a fun world to play in. And Innistrad was really fun to play in, so, yeah.
Awesome. All right, we're going to move on to the next card. Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, nice.
This one is super fun. I actually have this hanging right outside of my office. I love it so much.
This
is not the piece.
Yeah,
this is the reference.
Yeah, that art's from Noah Bradley, and actually, so the stained glass Knight token was my very first Magic card.
Is it really?
Yeah. And I'm not gonna lie, it was a huge departure from what I expected to be doing because, as you'll see when we get to the final, it's very heavy on the line art. Which Jarvis has told me for years specifically to get away from.
Right.
So that was kind of funny. But again, this was on Dominaria, so it felt like a huge homecoming. And so I was working with Mark Winters on this piece, and they made it very clear that they wanted that feel of old school Dominaria with the bright and hopeful vibe to it. So I just got to go all in on doing art that I would have wanted to do when I was like 19 and bring it to life in this. And doing it as a stained glass window was super fun.
Well, and it looks like between your sketches here, the main things that are changing are just like the trade dress with the horse. So changing up the skirt and stuff, but it looks like you nailed that composition on round one.
I think I sent a couple alternatives before that, and then Mark wanted a couple of changes. We had to, so I forget exactly why from the narrative, but the number 7 was important in it. I had 7 in a couple of places, and he said, "How about if we push that? We could get 7 here and 7 here and 7 here." I was like, "Okay." So.
Dun dun dun.
So, yeah, so that's the final piece. I had a lot of fun. I did a lot of research to see how they actually make stained glass windows, which was pretty fascinating. Each piece of glass is actually like usually it's like a single color, or it might have some color marbled in it. And then they do a grisaille pass over it, where it's basically like a gray wash over the whole thing. And then they go through and scrape that off or erase it to reveal the color beneath. So this was done digitally, but I built my layers to be just the same as if I was working on a stained glass window. I mean, not just the same, because it was way less tedious and time consuming. For a hot minute, I considered making an actual stained glass window, because it doesn't seem that hard, just really time consuming. So if I'd had an extra 3 months, I totally would have done that.
Well, that's a really good jumping off point. How long do you guys typically get to do each piece?
Well, the cycle is 6 weeks, and so depending on how many cards you have in that assignment, that's how much time you have. So I'm comfortable with like 3 cards in a wave because that's basically 2 weeks per card. So it gives me a chance to do revisions as needed.
I'll usually take 3 is comfortable. I've done 4, and the problem usually comes with other commissions. And so if I have 0 commissions, I'd still be comfortable with 4. 2 to 3 is what generally I'll get, and I still will take on another. Essentially, having 4 to 5, about 1 a week. So, yeah, that's usually I'm at the point where I can mentally guarantee a painting will be done within a week, even if it's not.
Yep.
What about you? Same?
Yeah, it's pretty similar. Yeah. I mean, we get a month and a half about. For me, what is interesting is I'll have a tendency to work very ass in the chair is kind of how I like to put it. Like I just really grind it, and so if I'll have a deadline, sketches will be done, and then I just cram it out, and so I'll sit and work for 3 days straight. 3 or 4 days straight is usually about how long it takes for me to finish a piece, and I'm working traditional in acrylic paint. So, there's prep time for the board and transferring it to drawing and all that fun stuff. So, but yeah, I mean, I'll usually, it takes me about 3 to 5 days to finish a piece, depending on how complicated it is. So,
Chris is being modest. He can do like 20 in a wave. He's ridiculous. He's a machine.
What are you talking about?
All right, Aaron.
All right.
Here we go. Dominaria.
Urza's Tome was a lot of fun to work on. So, let's see, what do we could talk about from description? So, I knew that this was going to be a sort of, maybe not an important card, but a fun card that was hopefully going to be used a lot. And that tome was, well, one of the descriptions they gave me, like the little images up on the top corner, one of them would have been the tome that Donato did from the original Dominaria. So I actually used a few pieces from his original painting in the new painting, like some of in the wood, the table near the bottom. So that pattern carved in the wood is on Donato's painting. And when setting it up for the sketches, one of the things that it's difficult to do when you're, like Chris says, like you're just always in the studio. Mm-hmm. But part of the process is also getting out of the studio. So for a day, I let myself go downtown. I live in Chicago. To go find some reference. I mean, I have books, I have stuff, but I wanted to get the feeling of an important book. So I went to the library to see, did they have any important books? How did they treat an important book? And I would go to the libraries, churches, just different buildings around downtown, and I ended up in the Art Institute of Chicago and in their library. And I was able to I got real lucky, and the shot on the right, the final painting is pretty close to the shot I took inside the library of the Art Institute. Of course, the background I've changed up a bunch, but the thing that the book is sitting on, that thing, it spins around, but it just felt right, and so I used that to kind of as my foundation for everything else. So it took a day to find just the right reference.
I love the glow of the gilded edges of the pages.
It's real gold. No, it's not. There are times where I would have, if it would have worked for the correct luminosity, I would have put gold in there, but it was easier just to paint it.
Awesome. Turn the tone a little bit lighter here for Chris.
Oh, yeah.
We've got a card from
This was-
Unstable.
Oh, this was so fun. So this batch of cards that I did for the Unstable was my first introduction to Magic. I've been a working professional in games since 2000. I had actually worked on, in 2000 I worked on the Harry Potter card game. Was one of my first jobs, right fresh out of art school. And I hadn't, I kind of pursued gaming art in the meantime, and so it had been, what year were these commissioned? I can't remember. 2015, 2014? Somewhere around there?
Yeah.
So it had been that long before working on another card game with WotC. Now I had been doing a bunch of other gaming art with them. Lots of Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition and 5th edition stuff. I did a card game called Kaijudo, which was really fun to work on. But so this was my first introduction to working on Magic. And this particular description, I just loved. I just loved that I was allowed to be my let my sense of humor out, and kind of have fun with the characters, and pushing a lacy stroller with a zombie head wearing a baby bonnet. How deliciously funny is that? I mean, it's just so silly. And so I really pushed in the sketch here, I really pushed the kind of the grotesqueness of, by putting a brain as like, a rattle for the baby zombie head. With the little eyeballs dangling off of it. And of course I had to put in the background I had to put the couple seeing the gross baby and going, oh my, it's so disgusting.
Well, something that's super exciting for us when we're working on unsets is, a lot of times we're really trying to avoid anachronistic tones with a modern environment, but on unsets we have a little bit more room to play without being as traditional high fantasy. Mm-hmm. So being able to play up a Victorian trope is a lot easier there. And it just shows us like, hey, what is the hunger for our audience for us to kind of push a little bit more modern into those directions? Obviously with Unstable, people really were feeling it. So as you can see from this final, right. I think Chris was too.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with this one. So, even the little butterflies in there were just a fun little whimsical touch that weren't in the description. They were just little fun things that I put in there. Sometimes that's okay. And other times it's not okay. So if I'll as artists, we express ourselves in visuals, and we say, okay, well, this would be kind of a fun little thing to put in there. If the art director doesn't say no, then we can put it in. But sometimes, it occasionally happens where they say, okay, you guys got to dial it back a little bit. It can't be too this, can't be too that. But with the unsets, we were kind of allowed to just be free and have fun with it. So I had a blast with this card. It was so fun. And of course, I had to put myself in the card.
That's awesome. I love that brain baby rattle. It's so creepy and good. Are you ready?
Sure.
Wilderness Reclamation.
It's not my fault. Let's do it. People have strong feelings about this card. So yeah, this was a cool opportunity to do kind of explore some contrasts, because it called for having this wild area where the buildings of Ravnica have begun to crumble and turn to rubble, and is being overtaken by the nature that I guess would have been around before it was covered with buildings. So yeah, so the idea, I don't remember if it was specifically in the art direction. I like the idea of the Gruul warrior like coming from one of the more civilized parts of the city, so that like they were coming through a tunnel or something that would open out into this area, like maybe an old sewer that wasn't really being used anymore. So, and then that would give them a good vantage point for this landscape that's being reclaimed. So I kind of got stuck on that idea, so I didn't vary it a whole lot. It was just more about angles and colors and shapes.
And this is a common way for us to receive sketches too. We'll get some options depending on the artist. Some artists are like, this is it. This is the one that I'm giving you. This is my vision. And some artists are like, hey, here's 3 takes on it. You know, I like these angles. I like this light. They'll, you know, often editorialize, like, this is the things I like about this. This is what I like about this. And so it can be challenging. We have a tool in the building that we call Drake, which is where all of the art comes into and is posted for everyone to review. So myself, other members of the world building team go in and we'll make comments like, hey, actually this is kind of close to this other card that we printed, or wow, I'm really feeling, you know, this vibe on B, for instance. But it all comes down at the end of the day to the art director's discretion based on their relationship with the artist and what they know the artist is going to be most successful at, and probably what they're the most excited about. So it's really cool to see these options, but a lot of times the artist will show their hand and be like, I'm really only interested in doing this one. But I wanted to do these takes because they were a little more on the nose for what you were asking. Let me break free of those chains of the art description and give you the thing that is awesome. And as you can see, pretty freaking awesome. I'm interested in knowing like how you guys react to players' reactions to the cards as opposed to the reaction to the art. I'm super fascinated by that.
It usually has nothing to do with the art.
Right?
Yeah.
They are disappointed in everything around the art. But they will come to us with the complaints as if the art is part of that. That's interesting.
That's happened a couple of times.
But the art has nothing to do with, we didn't design everything around it, so we can't fix it or change it, or it had nothing to do with it. But it is interesting, the love or the hate or the frustration is still delivered to us.
Yeah, I get a lot of comments I do a lot of conventions and stuff where I selling artwork, so I have a lot of interaction with fans in that kind of setting. Get a lot of complaints about this card, and I say the problem isn't Wilderness Reclamation, it's Nexus of Fate. So
also, I hope they're saying, but the art is freaking gorgeous.
I do get that. Okay. I do get that. Yep.
Or thankfully, a lot of people do come to us and like, this card isn't useful, but I keep it because of the art. That's always nice.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Yeah, there's nothing more satisfying than selling a print of artwork from a really bad card. That's very flattering.
This one's going to take a little bit of a different format because of how the process that Aaron worked on to create this piece.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. This was, well, first there's Dave's painting in the bottom. So of course when I see that, I'm like, I get to work on this character. So it was very exciting. That it takes a while as an artist to kind of get into the background and know what it is you're working on once you get a description. I've had an older card that it was a reprint that I didn't know because I just didn't know the older cards. But when I got this one, I knew that this one was going to be fun, and I didn't feel like I was redoing or replacing Dave's work. I felt like, oh, I get to continue this story of this character. So one of the things I did to prepare for this is I sculpted Bolas because I knew it was going to be a challenging angle to place this little character. And you can see I just made a little ball and I moved it, or I just, instead of sending in just a plain sketch, I was like, well, I'll just send in photos of this sculpt. Depending on the angle, if they pick a downward angle, then I'll probably have to put in the city. And if they pick an upward angle, well, it's just going to be the sky, so I don't have to stress out about a city.
That's cool. I didn't know you sent in the photos.
Yeah, well, there was some discussion that happens with an art director. I think I had sent maybe something, and something wasn't working right. And I was like, let me just send you my sculpt. And it answered all the questions. It feels weird sending a photo, but since I actually sculpted it, it didn't feel as weird.
But that's part of the process, though.
Yeah.
So this is just one more tool that you have as an artist to use. You know, that's really cool. I didn't know you did that either.
So we'll sculpt. We hire models. There's a lot of behind the scenes that doesn't happen. Like if swords and shields are made out of cardboard and cutouts. And so I just made a little sculpt of Nickel, and obviously they picked the one E, and we went with E, and so then I had to paint a city, which is...
This goes back to that Ravnica discussion earlier.
Yeah, I mean, again, I love it. It's a challenge. It's funny that every artist has different things that they will focus on, and I notice that I always tend to worry about the things that nobody else is going to notice. But if I do it right, you don't notice either.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And that was the point. I knew I could paint the sculpture. I knew I could do the character. I really stressed out about the city so that you wouldn't hopefully notice if something was off or out of place, or the value structures and stuff like that. So this was a lot of fun to work on.
Yeah, when this one was flying through our system, Drake, everyone was like, "Did you see the sculpt? Oh my gosh, did you see the rivets and the patina on the statue of Bolas?" Everyone was super excited. And obviously, Fibblethip is a big hit with the fans. So, again, with the reprint issue, sometimes people are just kind of taking a different take or a different angle on a reprint. But for Fibblethip, obviously, we've been looking at just trying to tell a different progression of this character and all the places he could potentially be totally lost, which has been super fun.
I'd also like to talk about a little bit, too, seeing what Aaron's process was there. We are problem solvers.
Yep. That's
what our goal is as artists when we get these descriptions. So it's interesting to see, I've never actually seen all of your thumbnails and stuff, so that's really cool to see. I prefer to work in black and white in my sketchbook with a big Sharpie marker and a pen. And Tyler likes to do digital color roughs in his thumbnails. And Aaron did a sculpture. So the goals are the same, to have a good piece of art for the card at the end, but the process is all different. I think that's a really cool insight into how artists work.
Yeah, there's never a wrong way to try to solve the problem.
Right.
And that's the most fascinating part about it.
Right.
Is everyone's tackling it from a whole bunch of different angles, and all of them are equally valid and awesome. It's just what's going to work for them in the moment, and what's going to produce the best work. So.
Right.
All right, Chris.
What do we have here? Yes.
I only bolded a couple words on this one. Tolarian Academy and Trained Magpie. So everyone knows what we're going for.
Yep. Sits on a perch. Yep. There we go. So this was kind of fun. There's a little bit in the description about, it has a collar on. And I kind of took that as maybe it's a little more than just a collar. Maybe it's got some character to it. Maybe the wizard dressed the magpie a little bit and spiced him up and said, here, you brought this to me, so I'm going to put it on your collar. So there's all these little storytelling elements too, the floating book in the background to kind of also pull into the Dominaria world, and those little fun tidbits and stuff. So This was a really fun piece. I was actually surprised at how quickly I did paint this. I think I painted it in 2 days, the final. I was just really into it, and like I said, I just kind of plug through when I sit down and start working. So, but you know, it was really fun, a really fun piece to work on. Yeah, I liked it. It's probably one of my favorite Magic cards, next to some of the stuff I've done that I've painted so far.
Well, it's always lovely when in these like intensely like lore deep sets, especially Return Twos, where we can bring in those moments of lightness and charm that aren't necessarily attached to like, oh, and this is the legacy of this character from blah, blah, you know. And it's just super fun. I mean, this is a super collected card around the office because everyone's just like, oh, it's so charming, we love it. And you know, people will start building around a card that has that level of charm when you're bringing all of the elements of like the name and the art and any flavor together, right? So even if it's not as strong, people will just start being like, oh, I want to do a commander deck with that because it feels fun. We'll make it fun.
Another thing too, from the arts, from art director to artist relationship, is the art directors at Wizards are fantastic at picking artists that work with that charm. Like if it were to be an artist who works darker to get this card, they might mess it up,
totally.
You know, and not make it too dark.
Yeah.
But there's this relationship that we all have when we're working with each other and trying to solve these problems, visual problems, and it's always a relief when you get a, for example, I'll get a description and I'll be like, oh, this is so me, you know, and that feels great. And
that is
like,
by
right,
design. So I think we only have a couple more to kind of zoom through here, but I wanted to give an opportunity for Tyler to talk about this piece because it kind of went through a bunch of different rounds for a bunch of different reasons, and I think it also turned out to be a phenomenal piece.
Thanks. Yeah, so this one, it has a bit of a story to it, but I'll get into it a little bit more when we see the final. This is, I think, my fourth assignment, so this is the fourth wave that I was on. This was like a promo card, and I was working with an art director that I had worked with at another company for years, so I had a really good relationship with him. So I felt really comfortable asking if I could try to do this one as a traditional painting, because all my work up to this point had been digital. And he had enough faith in me to give me a shot to go ahead and try that, and knew that if it went wrong, that I could always fix it digitally if I needed to. So yeah, this was a super fun description. Like, basically anything Rakdos is right in my wheelhouse. It's like fire and teeth and spikes and leather. That's all stuff I really enjoy painting. So I found a lot of I forget what they're called. The performers that do the whatever this is called. My brain's not working right now. Well, no, they perform on these hoops.
Okay, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I found a lot of reference photos of those, and I wanted to have a really disorienting feel to it. So I decided to put no horizon line in there, so you couldn't really tell which way was for sure up or down. So the image on the right was the final sketch that I turned in. But so I did the final painting, and I turned it in and got the green light, and then I was in the LAX airport. I was going on vacation to Australia, and then I got an email that said, hey, so there was a miscommunication somewhere along the line. This is actually supposed to be oriented vertically, not horizontally. And also, the gender of the character should be different than what we have now. And this is my first traditional piece, so I was just having a meltdown. Because I was like, what do you mean? But luckily, I had a couple of things that worked out really well. It's because I decided not to put in a horizon line. I said, well, what if we just oriented it this way? Could we make it work like that? And it turned out that would work with some edits. And also, I had, for whatever reason, I had a bunch of extra space on my board, so I had extra space to paint more background around it. So
Thank goodness.
For the worst possible situation for my first traditional painting for Magic, it was the best possible outcome. So we were able to salvage the piece and not have to start from scratch. So it was good.
We're going to do one more real quick. I did want to say, after this panel, make sure you go to visit everyone at their tables in the Artist Alley. Feel free to hunt me down with any questions as well. But to tee up our last one, dun dun dun, a Johnny. Hi, Aaron.
Who's the
from
Johnny?
Journey, and you're like, it's the Catman. The
It's a
Catman.
Joni?
But I think this is a really good example of when we write an art description and the artist is just going to do something better than what we necessarily write. Here we're asking for basically like a Nick Starfield sky and kind of a complicated pose.
Very extreme. This was, I mean, I really tried hard. I had some fun ideas, and
There's some fun ideas.
yeah, I mean, I was really happy with some of the direction. The top left felt like what they were asking for. You know, he's got this thing. He's looking at different. So sometimes what happens, sometimes a description is actually a description for an animation, and it's just sometimes, you know, writers get into an idea, and our job is, say, in terms of animation or a movie, we get one frame from that entire animation, and we have to kind of put everything into that one frame. And what happened was there was so much storytelling that was being asked, and I was still kind of new to Magic, so I'm like, I'll give you everything you asked for. And it turned out that it was a new writer, and the art director stepped in and did his job and said, you know, let's just simplify this. And that's where sketch 2 comes in. And he just like, let's just go with a simple plane, just make him real heroic. I think that's what we need. And it was again, still it was like, you're working on a planeswalker. So at the time it was a lot more stress. If I got a new one, it would be no stress. It would be stress, but not the same kind of stress. So I started this one out traditionally, and the stress just is amping up and amping up. And I decided about halfway through, there were so many things that I wanted to perfect that I will just finish this digitally and then paint the rest later, which I did eventually paint it. But again, there's different ways that we can solve our own problems. Even a traditional painter, we can go back and forth. I can start it digital and then finish it traditional, and in this case I started it traditional and finished it digital. And this was, I hope you guys like this one. I get a lot of compliments, but as an artist we still feel like I want to do it again.
Totally. Well, we're actually at time right now, so that's going to conclude where we're at today. But definitely say hi to these guys after we're done. We're all around.
Thank you.
Go to their tables, buy prints, be their friends. They love you. And any questions you have, I'm sure that we'd all be happy to answer. Thank you guys so
Thank
much
you.
for coming.